Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Cloud Atlas in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. West Film Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Cloud Atlas. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Film. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end zone. Let's start the video. Cloud Atlas is a 2012 epic science fiction film written and directed by the Wachowskis and Tykwer. Based on the 2004 novel by David Mitchell, it has multiple plots occurring during 6 eras and features an ensemble cast who perform multiple roles across these time periods. The film was produced by Grant Hill and Stefan Arndt in addition to the Wachowskis and Tykwer. During its 4 years of development, the producers had difficulties securing financial support. It was eventually produced with a budget between $100 million and $146.7 million provided by independent sources, making it one of the most expensive independent films ever produced. Filming for Cloud Atlas began in September 2011 at Babelsberg Studio in Potsdam, Babelsberg, Germany. It premiered on the 8th of September 2012 at the 37th Toronto International Film Festival and was publicly released on the 26th of October 2012 in conventional and IMAX cinemas. Critics were polarized, causing it to be included on various Best Film and Worst Film lists. It was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score for Tykwer, who co-scored the film, Johnny Klimek and Reinhold Heil. It received several nominations at the Saturn Awards, including Best Science Fiction Film, and won for Best Editing and Best Makeup. Plot: the story jumps between eras, spanning hundreds of years, until each storyline eventually resolves. Writings from characters in prior storylines are found in future storylines. Characters appear to recur in each era, but change relationships to each other, suggesting reincarnation or other connection between souls through the ages. In the Chatham Islands, 1849, American lawyer Adam Ewing is waiting for his transport ship to be repaired. He witnesses the whipping of Atua, an enslaved Moriori man. Atua stows away on Ewing's ship, having noticed Ewing's sympathy, and persuades him to advocate for Atua to join the crew as a free man. Atua saves Ewing's life before the ship's doctor, Henry Goose, can poison Ewing and steal his gold under the guise of treating him for a parasitic worm. In San Francisco, Ewing and his wife Tilda denounce her father's complicity in slavery and leave for New York to join the abolition movement. In 1936, English composer Robert Frobisher finds work as an amanuensis to aging composer Vivian Ayres, allowing Frobisher to compose his own masterpiece, the Cloud Atlas Sextet. As the sextet nears completion, Ayres demands credit for it and threatens to expose Frobisher's bisexuality if he refuses. Frobisher shoots and wounds Ayres and goes into hiding. Frobisher finishes the sextet and shoots himself before Frobisher's lover Rufus Sixsmith arrives. In San Francisco, 1973, journalist Louisa Ray meets Sixsmith, now a nuclear physicist. Sixsmith tips off Ray to a conspiracy to create a catastrophe at a nuclear reactor run by Lloyd Hooks, who secretly promotes oil energy interests. He is killed by Hooks' hitman, Bill Smoke, before he can give her a report as proof. Scientist Isaac Sachs passes her a copy of Sixsmith's report, but Smoke kills Sachs and then runs Ray's car off a bridge, destroying the report. With help from the plant's head of security, Joe Napier, Ray evades another assassination attempt, and Smoke is killed. With another copy of the report from Sixsmith's niece, Ray exposes the plot and has Hooks indicted. In London, 2012, gangster Dermot Hoggins murders a critic after a harsh review of his memoir, generating huge sales. Hoggins' brothers threaten the publisher, the aging Timothy Cavendish, for Hoggins' profits. Timothy's brother Denholm tells him to hide at Aurora House. Believing Aurora House is a hotel, Timothy signs in, only to discover he has unwittingly committed himself to a nursing home where all outside contact is prohibited. Denholm reveals that he sent Timothy there as revenge for an affair with his wife. Timothy escapes with 3 other residents, resumes his relationship with an old flame, and writes a screenplay about his experience. In Korea in 2144, Sunmi 451 is a fabricant, a humanoid clone indentured as a fast food server in a dystopian Neo-Seoul. She is exposed to ideas of rebellion by another fabricant, Yuna 939, who has obtained a clip of the movie about Cavendish's involuntary institutionalization. After Yuna is killed, Sunmi is rescued by rebel commander Haeju Chang, who exposes Sunmi to the banned writings of Alexander Solzhenitsyn and the full film version of Cavendish's experience. Eventually, Haeju shows her that fabricants are actually recycled into food that keeps them acquiescent. Sunmi makes a public broadcast of her revelations before the authorities attack, killing Haeju and recapturing Sunmi. After recounting her story to an archivist, she is executed. In 2321, the tribespeople of a post-apocalyptic Hawaii worship Sonmi, whose recorded testimony is the basis of their sacred text. Zachary Bailey's village is visited by Marinum, a member of an advanced off-world society called the Prescients, who are dying from a plague. Marinum is searching for a forgotten communication station on Monasol to send an SOS to off-world humans. In exchange for healing Zachary's niece, Katkin, Marinum is guided by Zachary to the station where Sonmi made her recording. Returning home, Zachary finds his tribe slaughtered by the cannibalistic Kona tribe. He kills the sleeping Kona chief and rescues Katkin before he and Marinum fight off the other Kona tribesmen. Zachary and Katkin join Marinum and the Prescients as their ship leaves Big Island. On a distant planet, Zachary is married to Marinum and recounts the story to his grandchildren. Main cast. The protagonist of each story is indicated in bold. Other cast members who appear in more than one segment include Robert Fife, Martin Woodkey, Brody Nicholas Lee, Alastair Petrie, and Sylvestre Letouzel. In addition, author David Mitchell makes a cameo appearance as a double agent in the futuristic Korea section. Production. Development. The film is based on the 2004 novel Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Filmmaker Tom Tykwer revealed in January 2009 his intent to adapt the novel and said he was working on a screenplay with the Wachowskis who optioned the novel. By June 2010, Tykwer had asked actors Natalie Portman, Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, James McAvoy, and Ian McKellen to star in Cloud Atlas. By April 2011, the Wachowskis joined Tykwer in co-directing the film. In the following May, with Hanks and Berry confirmed in their roles, Hugo Weaving, Ben Whishaw, Susan Sarandon, and Jim Broadbent also joined the cast. Actor Hugh Grant joined the cast days before the start of filming. He was originally supposed to have only 5 roles, but asked the Wachowskis for a 6th one, and subsequently was also cast as Denholm Cavendish in the 2012 storyline. According to Berry, the character of Ovid she plays in the 2144 storyline was originally meant to be a female character played by Tom Hanks, until the directors felt that Ovid was a logical part of the journey of the soul played by Berry. It was financed by the German production companies A Company, ARD Digito Film, and X Film. In May 2011, Variety reported that it had a production budget of $140 million. The filmmakers secured approximately $20 million from the German government, including $10 million, $11.8 million from the German Federal Film Fund, DFFF, $100,000, $118,000. Development funding and 1.5 million euros, $1.8 million from Medienboard Berlin Brandenburg, a German funder, as part of their plans to film at Studio Babelsberg later in 2011. The project also received 1 million euros, $1.2 million financial support from Filmstiftung NRW, $750,000 from Mitteldeutsche Medienförderung, $30 million, $35.5 million. From UE-Fonds, the biggest proportion of the budget, and $300,000, $355,000 from FFF Bayern, another German organization. The Wachowskis contributed approximately $7 million to the project out of their own finances. The budget was updated to $100 million. The Wachowskis stated that due to lack of financing, the film was almost abandoned several times. However, they noted how the crew was enthusiastic and determined. They flew. Even though their agents called them and said they don't have the money's not closed. They specifically praised Tom Hanks' enthusiasm. Warner Bros. Calls and, through our agent, says they've looked at the math and decided that they don't like this deal. They're pulling all of the money away, rescinding the offer. I was shaking. I heard, "Are you saying the movie is dead?" They were like, "Yes, the movie is dead." At the end of the meeting, Tom says, "Let's do it, I'm in. When do we start?" Tom said this unabashed, enthusiastic yes, which put our heart back together. We walked away thinking, this movie is dead, but somehow it's alive and we're going to make it. Every single time, Tom Hanks was the first who said, "I'm getting on the plane." And then once he said he was getting on the plane, basically everyone said, "Well, Tom's on the plane, we're on the plane." And so everyone flew to Berlin to begin the film. It was like this giant leap of faith from all over the globe. Some German journalists called it the first attempt at a German blockbuster. Principal photography. Tykwer and the Wachowskis filmed parallel to each other using separate camera crews. Although all three shot scenes together when permitted by the schedule, the Wachowskis mostly directed the 1849 story and the two set in the future, while Tykwer directed the stories set in 1936, 1973, and 2012. Tykwer said that the three directors planned every segment of the film together in pre-production and continued to work closely together through post-production. Warner Bros. Pictures representatives agreed to the film's 172-minute running time after previously stating that it should not exceed 150 minutes. Filming began at Studio Babelsberg in Potsdam, Babelsberg, Germany on the 16th of September 2011, the base camp for the production. Other German locations include the city of Düsseldorf and the Saxon Switzerland landscape, furthermore sets in and near Edinburgh and Glasgow, Scotland, and the Mediterranean island of Majorca, Spain. Glasgow doubled for both San Francisco and London. Scenes filmed in Scotland feature the new Clackmannanshire Bridge near Alloa. The Big Island and Pacific Islands stories were shot on Majorca, mostly in the World Heritage Site of the Serra de Tramuntana Mountains. Scenes were shot at Cala Tuent and near Formentor, amongst others. The opening scene, when Adam Ewing meets Dr. Henry Goose, was filmed at Sa Calobra Beach. Port de Soler provided the setting for the scene when the 19th century ship is mooring. The film was meant to be shot in chronological order. However, Barry broke her foot 2 days before she was supposed to start filming. Instead of replacing her, the Wachowskis and Tykwer heavily changed the initial filming schedule. Barry stated that it involved traveling back and forth to Majorca and then Germany. Then we had to go back to Majorca when my foot got a little bit better, and we were able to shoot some of that stuff on the mountainside when I could climb a little bit better. It was all over the place. According to her, Tom would play nurse to me. He really took care of me. He would bring me coffee and soup and just stay with me during breaks in shooting because it was difficult for me to move around, especially at the beginning. I basically had to be helped back to my chair after every take. But you learn to adapt to the situation. But with Tom at my side, I was really able to go beyond my own expectations of what I was capable of as an actress. Music. Besides directing the film, Tykwer co-composed the score with his longtime collaborators Reinhold Heil and Johnny Klimek. The trio worked together for years as Pale 3, composing music for several films directed by Tykwer, most notably Run Lola Run, The Princess and the Warrior, Perfume, The Story of a Murderer, and The International. The score was recorded in Leipzig, Germany with the MDR Leipzig Radio Symphony Orchestra and the Leipzig Radio Chorus, and Gene Pritzker orchestrated the score. Water Tower Music released the soundtrack album via digital download on the 23rd of October 2012 and CD on the 13th of November 2012. Release. The film premiered at the 2012 Toronto International Film Festival, where it received a 10-minute standing ovation. It was released on the 26th of October 2012 in the United States. Warner Bros. Pictures distributed it in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and Focus Features International handled sales for other territories. According to the Wachowskis, Summit Entertainment, who previously worked with Tykwer on Perfume, The Story of a Murderer, was originally going to distribute it internationally, but ultimately rejected it. It was released in cinemas in China on the 31st of January 2013 with 39 minutes of cuts, including removal of nudity, a sexual scene, and numerous conversations. Marketing. A 6-minute trailer, accompanied by a short introduction by the 3 directors describing the ideas behind the creation of the film, was released on the 26th of July 2012. 54. A shorter official trailer was released on the 7th of September 2012. The 6-minute trailer includes 3 pieces of music. The opening piano music is the main theme of the soundtrack, Prelude, the Atlas March, the Cloud Atlas Sextet, by composing trio Tom Tykwer, Johnny Klimek, and Reinhold Heil, followed by an instrumental version of the song Sonera from Thomas J. Bergerson's album Illusions. The song in the last part is Outro from M83's album Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. Home media. The film was released on home media, Blu-ray, DVD, and UV digital copy on May 14, 2013. Reception. Critical response. The film garnered divided reactions by both critics and audiences, with many debating its length and editing of the interwoven stories, but praising other aspects such as the cinematography, score, visual style, ensemble cast, and ambition. The film received a lengthy standing ovation at the 37th Toronto International Film Festival, where it premiered on the 9th of September 2012. According to review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 66% of 293 critics gave the film a positive review, with an average rating of 6.710. The site's critics' consensus is that its sprawling, ambitious blend of thought-provoking narrative and eye-catching visuals will prove too unwieldy for some, but the sheer size and scope of Cloud Atlas are all but impossible to ignore. Review aggregator Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 55 out of 100, based on 45 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. According to the website, the film appeared on 14 critics' top 10 lists for 2012. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C+ on an A+ to F scale. Film critic Roger Ebert gave the film 4 out of 4 stars and ranked the film among his best of the year, one of the most ambitious films ever made. Even as I was watching Cloud Atlas the first time, I knew I would need to see it again. Now that I've seen it the second time, I know I'd like to see it a third time. I think you will want to see this daring and visionary film. I was never, ever bored by Cloud Atlas. On my second viewing, I gave up any attempt to work out the logical connections between the segments, stories, and characters. Conversely, Slant Magazine's Callum Marsh called it a unique and totally unparalleled disaster and said, "Its badness is fundamental, an essential aspect of the concept and its execution that I suspect is impossible to remedy or rectify." Henry Barnes, writing in The Guardian, said that, at 172 minutes, Cloud Atlas carries all the marks of a giant folly, and those unfamiliar with the book will be baffled. He gave the film 2 out of 5 stars. Nick Pickerton, who reviewed the film for The Village Voice, said, "There is a great deal of humbug about art and love in Cloud Atlas, but it is decidedly unlovable. And if you want to learn something about feeling, you're at the wrong movie." Film critic Mark Kermode on his first viewing called it an extremely honorable failure, but a failure. But then on a second viewing for the release of the DVD in the UK stated, "Second time around, I find it to be more engaging." Still not an overall success, but containing several moments of genuine magic and buoyed up by the exuberance of high-vaulting ambition. Village Voice and Time magazine both named Cloud Atlas the worst film of 2012. Variety described it as an intense 3-hour mental workout rewarded with a big emotional payoff. One's attention must be engaged at all times, as the mosaic triggers an infinite range of potentially profound personal responses. James Rocky of MSN Movies stated, "It is so full of passion and heart and empathy that it feels completely unlike any other modern film in its range, either measured through scope of budget or sweep of action." The Daily Beast called Cloud Atlas one of the year's most important movies. Michael Seepley of the New York Times commented on the film, "You will have to decide for yourself whether it works. It's that kind of picture. Is this the stuff of Oscars? Who knows? Is it a force to be reckoned with in the coming months? Absolutely." Box office. Despite expectations that the film could be a success, the film opened to $9.6 million from 2,008 theaters, an average of $4,787 per theater, finishing second at the U.S. box office. The debut was described as dreadful by Box Office Mojo. The film ultimately grossed $27.1 million in the U.S. and $103.4 million internationally, for a total of $130.5 million. Reaction from the crew. Directors. On the 25th of October 2012, after the premiere at Toronto, and despite the standing ovation it received there, Lilly Wachowski A stated as, "Soon as encounter a piece of art they don't fully understand the first time going through it, they think it's the fault of the movie or the work of art. They think it's a mess. This doesn't make any sense." And they reject it, just out of an almost knee-jerk response to some ambiguity or some gulf between what they expect they should be able to understand and what they understand. In the same interview, Lana Wachowski said people will Cloud Atlas to be rejected. They will call it messy or complicated or undecided whether it's trying to say something new agey profound or not. And we're wrestling with the same things that Dickens and Hugo and David Mitchell and Herman Melville were wrestling with. We're wrestling with those same ideas, and we're just trying to do it in a more exciting context than conventionally you're allowed to. We don't want to say we are making this to mean this. What we find is that the most interesting art is open to a spectrum of interpretation. Cast. Tom Hanks has come to praise Cloud Atlas strongly in the years since its release. In 2013, he stated, "I've seen it 3 times now and discovered, I swear to God, different, profound things with each viewing." In a 2017 interview, he called it a movie that altered my entire consciousness, saying, "It's the only movie I've been in that I've seen more than twice." Halle Berry said in an interview, "It would be impossible to explain what I really feel or think about the film. It exists on so many different levels. I love the totality of all the characters." She talked about playing characters belonging to other ethnicities and playing a male. "This is so poignant for an actor and someone like me to be able to shed my skin, to do something that I would have never been able to do. If it were not for this kind of project, I still wouldn't have done that." In a 2017 interview, Jim Broadbent called the film great to do and fantastic. In another interview, he expressed disappointment over the commercial failure of the film, saying, "It was an independent film and needed a lot of money behind it to get it out there. Warner Bros. Had the distribution rights, but it wasn't one of their own, so I think it might have been marketed harder if it was." Hugh Grant said in an October 2014 interview, "I thought was amazing. The Wachowskis are the bravest filmmakers in the world, and I think it's an amazing film. It's frustrating to me. Every time I've done something outside the genre of light comedy, the film fails to find an audience at the box office. And sadly, Cloud Atlas never really found the audience it deserved." He later said in 2016, "The whole thing was fascinating. When you work with proper people who love cinema, the Wachowskis are a special breed. They're not the same as people who just make movies, and we happen to use cameras. They are people who really love cinema." Adaptation is a form of translation, and all acts of translation have to deal with untranslatable spots. If you are the one with knowledge of the into language, do what works. When asked whether I mind the changes made during the adaptation of Cloud Atlas, my response is similar. The filmmakers speak fluent film language, and they've done what works. David Mitchell in the Wall Street Journal. David Mitchell. Before hearing about the Wachowskis and Tykwer's project, the author David Mitchell believed it was impossible to adapt his book as a film. My only thought was, what a shame this could never be a film. It has a Russian doll structure. God knows how the book gets away with it, but it does. But you can't ask a viewer of a film to begin a film 6 times. the sixth time being an hour and a half in. They'd all walk out. In October 2013, Mitchell called the film magnificent, having been very impressed by the screenplay. He was very satisfied by the casting, especially of Hanks, Barry, and Broadbent. He said that he could not even remember how he had originally imagined the characters in his mind before seeing the movie. He also supported the changes from the novel, impressed by how the Wachowskis and Tykwer successfully disassembled the structure of the book for the needs of the movie. The advocacy group Media Action Network for Asian Americans and several commentators online criticized the film's use of white actors in yellowface to portray East Asian characters in the neo-soul sequences. Mana President Guy Aoki said that the film had a double standard, as it used black actors to portray black characters. The directors responded that the same multiracial actors portrayed multiple roles of various nationalities and races, not just East Asian, across a 500-year story arc, showing the continuity of souls critical to the story. The portrayal of Moriori character Atua by a black British man was subject to similar scrutiny. It was criticized by some as offensive and confusing for audiences. Accolades. The film was shortlisted for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, but was not nominated in any category. Dai Kongrong's best-selling Chinese translation of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake and the film version of David Mitchell's 2004 Booker shortlisted novel Cloud Atlas, both complex fictions about the cyclical nature of life, should warn us against calling anything unfilmable or untranslatable. They are not necessarily proof, however, that they're worth filming or translating. In a charming introduction to the new paperback edition of his novel, Mitchell expresses his good fortune that it fell into such capable hands as Lana and Andy Wachowski and Tom Tykwer, the film's co-directors and adapters. The Wachowskis love intricate narratives in the world of ideas. Their Matrix trilogy has, I believe, been used in introductory philosophy courses at American colleges. Tykwer's Run Lola Run, a German action movie telling the same story thrice, with events taking different courses, was preceded by an epigraph from Eliot's Little Gidding, and he later filmed Heaven, the first part of a trilogy left at his death by Krzysztof Kieślowski, the Polish cinematic metaphysician. Mitchell's novel tells 6 interrelated stories in a variety of genres spread over a period of nearly 500 years, from 1850 to 2321. They run consecutively, but stop just before their crucial concluding episodes, which then follow in the latter part of the book. The adapters have wisely decided to establish, relatively briefly, the 6 settings, and then interweave the stories. This produces some initial puzzlement, but results in a rather different, more compact effect. In the earliest story, set in the South Pacific in 1850, an American lawyer is converted to the abolitionist cause after meeting a fugitive slave. In the second, set in Scotland in the mid-1930s and inspired by Eric Fenby's memoir of working with Frederick Dilius, an ambitious gay musician seeks redemption by attaching himself as an amanuensis to an elderly composer. The third strand takes place in 2012 and offers social satire and comic relief. A dotty, impoverished publisher, a characteristically funny turn by Jim Broadbent, becomes suddenly wealthy by bringing out an Irish thug's autobiography, and to escape the author's brutal brothers, he's given shelter in what proves to be a Kafkaesque asylum. The next in time, its mode the political conspiracy thriller, centers on an investigative reporter, Halle, exposing a nefarious power conglomerate's world-threatening activities in San Francisco in 1973, the post-Summer of Love period when the counterculture was in decline. The last 2 narrative strands, in some ways the most conventional, are science fiction tales set in different dystopian futures that recall H.G. Wells's The Time Machine and the 1936 film of his Things to Come. In a waterlogged Brave New Soul of 2146, a subclass is being cloned to provide servants for the local dictators, as well as more sinister services. In an even more distant post-apocalyptic future, where a form of pidgin English is spoken, an old man called Zachary, Tom Hanks, tries to preserve a certain decency in a barbaric world dominated by marauding bands of cannibalistic horsemen. Inevitably, the film's form invites comparison with the first great American movie, D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, 1916, in which 4 historical narratives of persecution, ranging from ancient Babylon to the contemporary U.S., are intertwined. Intolerance, however, is dominated by one single big idea, whereas Cloud Atlas names and dramatizes a wide variety: heaven and the afterlife, karma and the transmigration of souls. The ancient belief in life as a repetitive cycle that Nietzsche revived in the concept of eternal recurrence, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Einstein's theory of relativity, the transformational experiences of Carlos Castaneda, and of course, déjà vu. This heady stuff is given an intoxicating sense of individual purpose in Cloud Atlas, where everything is connected across the years by an image, a phrase, a dream, the eponymous piece of music, as well as through a diary, a letter, a film, a book that passes on a predecessor's thought. It also asks how eternal recurrence can be changed by love and sacrifice to thwart what appears to be a persistent cycle of cruelty, oppression, and exploitation. One major role of culture is to offer spiritual consolation, especially in times of doubt and chaos, and Cloud Atlas clearly belongs alongside such mystical works as The Life of Pi and the films of Terrence Malick that aspire to answer such needs at a higher, more sophisticated level than sentimental comfort. This takes us into another of the director's strategies, the casting of each of the leading actors in 5 or 6 roles. This again isn't new. Stanley Kubrick used this device in numerous films, most notably his debut Fear and Desire, Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, and 2001 A Space Odyssey, and Lindsay Anderson employed it throughout his picaresque masterpiece Oh, Lucky Man. But no one has used it as extensively as here, with characters reappearing over the centuries, shifting between young and old, male and female, Europe and Asia. John Huston, in his comedy thriller The List of Adrian Messenger, employed the gimmick of disguising familiar stars as a way of distracting us from a thin script. This is not the case with Cloud Atlas, but we do spend a lot of time trying to identify the actors behind the prosthetic makeup, thus distracting us from noting their roles in the giant mosaic. No doubt the directors expect us to recognize the connections subliminally. Still, it has a certain grandeur, if ultimately it's an inspiritingly ambitious folly. The cinematographers, John Toll, Frank Grebe, and the designers, Hugh Batup, Uli Hanisch, have done a fine job, and this is one of the rare large-scale international co-productions that have a sense of unity. I occasionally winced, but was mostly emotionally and intellectually involved, carried along by the oceanic flow. I'm not at all sure, though, that I'd want to see Cloud Atlas a second time. At least, not in this life. Even as I was watching Cloud Atlas the first time, I knew I would need to see it again. Now that I've seen it the second time, I know I'd like to see it a third time. But I no longer believe repeated viewings will solve anything. To borrow Churchill's description of Russia, it is a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. It fascinates in the moment. It's getting from one moment to the next that is tricky. Surely this is one of the most ambitious films ever made. The little world of film criticism has been alive with interpretations of it, which propose to explain something that lies outside explanation. Any explanation of a work of art must be found in it, not taken to it. As a film teacher, I was always being told by students that a film by David Lynch, say, or Werner Herzog, was a retelling of the life of Christ, say, or Moby Dick. My standard reply was, maybe it's simply the telling of itself. Yet, Cloud Atlas cries out for an explanation, and surely you've noticed that I've been tap dancing around one. I could tell you that it relates 6 stories taking place between the years 1849 and 2346. I could tell you that the same actors appear in different roles, playing characters of different races, genders, and ages. Some are not even human, but fabricants. I could tell you that the acting and makeup are so effective that often I had no idea if I was looking at Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, or Jim Broadbent. I could tell you that, and what help is it? I could tell you that each segment is a refashioning of the story contained in the previous one. That the same birthmark turns up in every period of time. That a repeated motif is that all lives are connected by a thirst for freedom. That the movie was inspired by the much-loved novel of the same name by David Mitchell. that in the novel, the stories were told in chronological order and then circled back again from end to beginning. That the movie finds its connections through the reappearances of the same actors in different roles and deliberately refers to one story from within another. Now are you wiser? I'm treading water. And now could follow a very long paragraph introducing and describing the different characters played by the actors. But you would lose your way all the same, because many of the performances and disguises are so cunningly effective. I could tell you that Halle Berry's work as a mid-1970s investigative reporter works well for me, and the gnarly wisdom of Tom Hanks as an old man telling tales is the most impenetrable. I despair. I think you will want to see this daring and visionary film, directed by Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, and Andy Wachowski. Anywhere you go where movie people gather, it will be discussed. Deep theories will be proposed. Someone will say, I don't know what in the hell I saw. The names of Freud and Jung will come up. And now you expect me to unwrap the mystery from the enigma and present you with a nice, shiny riddle? Sometimes the key to one movie can be suggested by another one. We know that the title refers to early drawings of the shapes and behavior of clouds. Not long ago, I saw a Swedish film, Simon and the Oaks, about a daydreaming boy who formed a bond with an oak tree. In its limbs, he would lie reading books of imagination and then allow his eyes to rest on the clouds overhead. As he read a book about desert wanderers, the clouds seemed to take shape as a ghostly caravan of camels in procession across the sky. I was never, ever bored by Cloud Atlas. On my second viewing, I gave up any attempt to work out the logical connections between the segments, stories, and characters. What was important was that I set my mind free to play. Clouds do not really look like camels or sailing ships or castles in the sky. They are simply a natural process at work. So too, perhaps, are our lives. Because we have minds and clouds do not, we desire freedom. That is the shape the characters in Cloud Atlas take, and how they attempt to direct our thoughts. Any concrete, factual attempt to nail the film down to cold fact, to tell you what it means, is as pointless as trying to build a Clockwork Orange. But oh, what a film this is, and what a demonstration of the magical, dreamlike qualities of the cinema, and what an opportunity for the actors, and what a leap by the directors, who free themselves from the chains of narrative continuity. And then the wisdom of the old man staring into the flames makes perfect sense. Cloud Atlas has already stirred up quite a discussion between moviegoers. It's safe to say the film has earned its fair share of fans. But it's also true that it has its share of detractors. To be honest, I can see where people could either love it or hate it. It's a highly ambitious picture that pulls off an incredibly clever storytelling technique. But it could also be viewed as a 3-hour grind that features many of the Wachowskis' familiar self-indulgences. So how was it for me? A groundbreaking cinematic accomplishment or an epic-sized disaster? Well, neither. But I did find it a chore to sit through despite the things it does right. It's practically impossible to give any kind of brief synopsis of the plot of Cloud Atlas. It's basically 6 individual stories that take place at different points in time. The first story is set in the 1800s and follows a young lawyer handling business for his father on a voyage across the Pacific. The second story takes place in England during the 1930s, as a young, unfulfilled composer is hired to help an older, accomplished composer create his music. The third story is set in the 1970s, as an investigative reporter finds herself in danger after uncovering a nuclear energy conspiracy. The fourth story, set in 2012, follows a writer and publisher who finds himself in debt and in deep with some local mobsters. The fifth story jumps to a futuristic, high-tech Seoul, Korea, where a clone is believed to hold the keys to the future. The final story leaps further into the future, where mankind is left to live in a barbaric, caveman-like world. Now there's a process to watching Cloud Atlas. First, the audience must adjust to the fractured form of storytelling. The Wachowskis and co-writer and co-director Tom Tykwer don't tell the 6 stories separately. Instead, the movie jumps from one story to another, requiring the audience to keep up. For this to work, we first have to get to know the characters. For the most part, the introductions work pretty well, although I did struggle to connect with some of them. Once the characters and their stories are laid out, then the audience can sit back and watch things unfold. This is when the movie was most effective. In fact, I found myself completely absorbed in what I was seeing during the middle of the film. Then the audience has to piece each of the stories together, some through more obvious and straightforward connections, and others through more cryptic and allegorical meanings. This is another place where I felt the film really stumbled. I want to start with the positives. The storytelling technique employed in Cloud Atlas could have potentially been a disaster. Earlier, I used the word ambitious, and for good reason. Taking pieces of 6 individual stories, breaking them up, and interweaving them together while maintaining a good, strong narrative is an incredible challenge. I was blown away with how well it was done in this movie. We seamlessly move back and forth from story to story, and the filmmakers are able to keep total control of the narrative. Even later, when the transitions seem to come quicker and quicker, the broader story never loses its sense of cohesion. It's intelligently crafted and executed, and it serves as a great reminder of the power of cinematic storytelling. There are also some amazing special effects and spectacular cinematography. The overall visual presentation of Cloud Atlas gives it a true epic motion picture feel, and it beautifully captures the various time periods that it dabbles in. I love the period-perfect look of the 1800s, as well as the futuristic landscapes and technologies from the later period. Every place we visit in time looks and feels perfect. It also helps to have such a superb cast involved. The movie is loaded with strong performances from actors and actresses playing multiple roles. Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, Hugo Weaving, Susan Sarandon, Keith David, Hugh Grant, Doona, and Jim Sturgess all do great work in bringing this complex story to life. Each play a variety of different characters in the different storylines, often in heavy prosthetics and sometimes in full drag. This is a good lead-in to some of my questions and concerns about Cloud Atlas. I'm not certain why it was necessary to have these actors play multiple roles. I'm assuming the filmmakers felt it added a sense of connection between the stories. Or maybe there was another underlying intention that I just don't care to figure out. Regardless, do we really need to see Hugo Weaving dressed up as a husky female nurse? Then there is the issue with how some of the individual stories end. There are a couple that I found quite satisfying, but then there are those that feel a little too tidy and borderline conventional, as well as one that's just flat out silly. Also, I never felt as though I made the full connections between some of the storylines. The movie simply doesn't tie them together sufficiently. Now, to be fair, a movie like this almost begs to be viewed a second time. I'm certain there are little nuggets of information that I missed. But the problem is that I'm not sure I want to tackle it again, and that's in large part due to the sometimes laborious 3-hour running time. Now, I don't mind long movies, but there were stretches in Cloud Atlas, particularly in the first and third acts, where the film seemed to be spinning its wheels. This isn't unusual for the Wachowskis, and I had a similar problem with their Matrix series. Much like those movies, this film at times feels bloated and self-indulgent. I also found the social commentary to be obvious and heavy-handed. Even in the instances where the message is good, they sometimes come across as blatant and contrived. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not at all familiar with the source material, but I can't imagine it being as glaringly in your face as the film can sometimes be. Cloud Atlas is a difficult movie to process. It can sometimes be exhilarating cinema, and at other times a frustrating chore. From a technical standpoint, the film is astonishing. Both the visuals and sound design are phenomenal, and the ability to capture the uniqueness of each time period is quite amazing. Even more impressive is the artistry involved in the unconventional storytelling method. There's a crisp lyrical harmony to how we're moved back and forth from one story to the next. Unfortunately, there are a host of other problems, including those mentioned above, that keeps Cloud Atlas from being a really good film. But I haven't asked the bigger question surrounding this movie. What's it really about? Is it above love conquering all? Is it about choices and the blessings or consequences that follow them? Is it about a deep interconnection that all mankind share? I'm not sure, but in the end, Cloud Atlas is a relatively small movie hidden underneath its lavish ambition and grandeur. It's an exercise in style over substance that has enough flaws and misguided conceits to overshadow the things it does really well. That's a shame. Directors Andy Wachowski, Lana Wachowski, and Tom Tykwer expect a lot from the audience of Cloud Atlas, a motion picture set on the boundaries of time, genre, and conventional filmmaking. At once, the viewer must be able to process 6 separate stories that span 5 periods in time as the filmmakers dance backward and forward among them, the ambitious structure reformatting David Mitchell's 2004 novel. Each story follows a distinct genre, among them drama, comedy, tragedy, thriller, science fiction, and adventure. An audience must identify how the impressive ensemble of actors has separate roles in each story, emphasizing the epic configuration as one of interconnectivity, while the themes throughout the various stories mirror and often take cues from one another. Decoding exactly how these complicated and interwoven elements form a whole is less important than the feeling of something larger behind it all. By the end of this 172-minute wonder, the viewer need only recognize the implementation, power, and tradition of great storytelling. Funded independently by mostly German money and distributed in the U.S. by Warner Bros., Cloud Atlas must be one of the most aspiring and expensive independent films ever produced. Securing a budget of over $100 million, German filmmaker Tykwer, Run Lola Run, teamed with the Wachowski, Speed Racer, for a picture they all must have known would not appeal to the masses. No matter how successful the Wachowski siblings' actionized, pseudo-intellectual Matrix trilogy may have been, certainly no Hollywood studio would put forth the backing necessary to erect a seemingly impenetrable, unfilmable novel into a heady, near 3-hour film whose result would be inevitable polarization of the masses. And yet, nothing about this production feels inaccessible or reminiscent of a picture with any limitations whatsoever. From the pristine quality of the special effects to the sheer scope of the sets, this is a film without margins. Every facet looks like that of a major Hollywood production, except it's infused with the poetic and philosophical insights of filmmakers working outside of a major studio. The director's best visual resource, however, remains the cast. Assembled here are Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, Hugh Grant, Jim Broadbent, Jim Sturgess, Keith David, Ben Whishaw, Doona, Hugo Weaving, James D'Arcy, Susan Sarandon, and Joe Shun. Each plays multiple roles, most with a major part in at least one story, and most occupying races and genders not their own during one of their supporting roles. To describe them all would be far-reaching and time-consuming, but consider this example. Barry plays an investigative reporter, a Jewish woman, a slave, a male South Korean doctor, an Indian woman, and a member of a technologically enhanced future race. Each role for each actor comes with an individual makeup design, transforming these performers and their protagonists in ways that make the viewer's experience an investigative one. Some of the costumes are less successful than others, such as when Doona becomes an awkward British lass, but the narrative symbolism behind these choices speaks volumes. Though narrow viewers may find dressing up one race as another to be in poor taste, racial representations are indiscriminate and bound by a greater purpose, the effect emphasizing the film's stable theme of eternal recurrence. The notion that within infinite time and space, existence will cycle and recur an infinite number of times. The stories themselves range from the mid-19th century to a distant post-apocalyptic future world. Chronologically, the film begins with The Pacific Journal of Adam Ewing in 1850, following a naive notary, Sturgess, who, while at sea, defends the life of a Moriori tribe stowaway and finds himself poisoned by a duplicitous friend. Next comes Letters from Zedelgum, a 1931 account of a struggling musician, Whishaw, who writes letters to his illicit male lover and becomes an apprentice to an idolized composer. Half-Lives, the first Louisa Ray mystery, takes place in the 1970s and proceeds like the China Syndrome, where a reporter, Barry, uncovers a sinister plot involving a nuclear power executive, Grant, a deadly conspiracy, and a ruthless assassin, Weaving. Present day finds the ghastly ordeal of Timothy Cavendish, where an aged publisher, Broadbent, is interned inside an appalling senior care facility from where he plots to escape. In the mid-22nd century, an orison of Sonmi 451 tells of a genetically engineered servant, Bay, in a dystopian Neo-Soul. After being rescued from certain death by rebel forces, she becomes a figurehead for an uprising against the powers that be. In the final mythic story called Slush's Crossin' and Everything After, set in the distant post-apocalyptic future, a primitive tribesman, Hanks, guides a woman from an elite race, Barry, to a place on his island where the remains of a long-lost culture still stand. Along with a vast array of characters, their similarities, and reincarnated souls, there are amazing sights to behold in Cloud Atlas. Most apparent are the futurist sequences, with elaborate sci-fi chases on energized highways along a vast, neon-laden cityscape, or there's the crumbled post-apocalyptic world where Hanks's character is plagued by a devilish green-skinned whisperer weaving, spouting lies and suspicions in his ear. These most audacious examples, directed by the Wachowskis, might threaten to overshadow the subtleties of Tykwer's contributions in the past and present segments, where his immersion into historical details is flawless, and his characters have far more dramatically complicated circumstances. The most affecting tale involves the relationship between the struggling musician and his devoted lover, while the most heartwarming concerns the comical senior citizens revolting against a crooked nurse Ratched figure, Weaving. As a whole, there's something for everyone here. But for those not pulled toward this or that genre, the entire picture remains enthralling. To explore the individual stories and their precise connections to one another in more detail would be futile for the purpose of this review. Let us instead consider the structure and themes. Within each tale, there are varied methods and devices of storytelling. Novels, personal letters, journals, motion pictures, pictorials, and the oral tradition. Mitchell's book unfolded sequentially, telling the first half of each story from the participant's perspective, and the second within a separate story from the perspective of someone else reading about or watching it in video form. But the trio of directors uses a bravado structure that aligns the narrative beats of every story, cross-cutting through time to further highlight how every story is different, yet every story is the same. Emotional aches and suspenseful turns seem to occur across time, but in harmony with one another inside the film's composition. As such, there are recurring themes throughout: class struggles, elitist monsters, betrayal, slavery, humanist revolution, and most transcendently, love. Each ripples across time, and each resonates in separate ways. Some are joyful, others harrowing, others still hilarious or exciting. Our involvement is never limited to a single emotional reaction, but the capacity to feel the breadth of emotions from one moment to the next is essential. Cloud Atlas opens with one of the many characters played by Tom Hanks recounting tales around a fire. From his aged, wrinkled face comes a grizzled voice, and a horrible scar down his face cuts across his one pale eye. He might be an ancient caveman grunting out his tale, but in fact, he belongs to the distant future. Time is relative, but all remains the same. What a simple, rather beautiful notion behind such an uncommonly grand piece of filmmaking, whose ideas will either speak volumes or completely dismiss whole sections of the audience. Undeniable is the profound vision of Tykwer and the Wachowskis, who approach Terrence Malick, The Tree of Life, territory in that their divisive film is less an intellectual viewing than something that must be felt and experienced, perhaps multiple times, to truly grasp its meaning, or at least what it means to you. Amid the spell of visual and narrative connections, beyond question, Cloud Atlas will confound and maybe even aggravate some unwilling to, quite simply, go with the flow. But others will find what few have: a bold, technically awesome, and thematically enduring picture whose arrangement and ambition are unprecedented. In 1849, a businessman on a Melville-esque sea voyage in the South Pacific battles a mysterious illness and shelters a runaway slave. In 1936, Robert Frobisher, a penniless young composer, flees Cambridge for Edinburgh to join the household of a vain and temperamental maestro. 4 decades later, an alternative press journalist risks her life investigating safety problems at a nuclear power plant. In our own day, a feckless book publisher finds himself trapped in a nursing home. Sometime in the corporate totalitarian future, a member of the genetically engineered serving class, a fast food worker named Sonmi 451, is drawn into rebellion, while in a still more distant, post-apocalyptic, neo-tribal future, where Sonmi is worshipped as a deity, a Hawaiian goatherd. That last one is a little more complicated, involving a devil, marauders on horseback, and the possibility of interplanetary travel. It is also where the spoilers dwell. In any case, these half-dozen stories are the components of Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell's wondrous 2004 novel, now lavishly adapted for the screen by Lana and Andy Wachowski and Tom Tykwer. Cloud Atlas is a movie about migratory souls and wayward civilizations, loaded with soaring themes and flights of feeling, as vaporous and comprehensive as its title. Big ideas, or at least earnest intellectual conceits, crowd the screen along with suave digital effects and gaudy costumes. Free will battles determinism. Solidarity faces off against domination. Belief in a benevolent cosmic order contends with fidelity to the cruel Darwinian maxim that the weak are meat the strong do eat. Describing this movie, despite its lofty ambitions, can feel like an exercise in number crunching, and watching it is a bit like doing a series of math problems in your head. How do 3 directors parcel 6 plots into 172 minutes? And how much might that cost? Which actor? Most of them inhabit several roles, in some cases changing gender or skin color, as well as costume, accent, and hairstyle, tackles the widest range of characters. What is the correlation between a musical phrase and a comet-shaped birthmark? How many times does Hugo Weaving sneer? Maybe the achievement of Cloud Atlas should be quantified rather than judged in more conventional, qualitative ways. This is by no means the best movie of the year, but it may be the most movie you can get for the price of a single ticket. It blends farce, suspense, science fiction, melodrama, and quite a bit more, not into an approximation of Mr. Mitchell's graceful and virtuosic pastiche, but rather into an unruly grab bag of styles, effects, and emotions held together, just barely, by a combination of outlandish daring and humble sincerity. Together, the filmmakers try so hard to give you everything: the secrets of the universe and the human heart, action, laughs, and romance, tragedy, and mystery, that you may wind up feeling both grateful and disappointed. Though the 6 sections flow together more or less seamlessly, it is also possible to divide the movie into Wachowski and Tykwer halves. Mr. Tykwer's contributions are those that take place closer to the present. They concern the composer, the journalist, and the publisher, whereas the Wachowskis leap back to the past and forward into the future. They are less concerned with efficient storytelling than with the maximization of spectacular and intellectual impact, with blowing your mind and explaining the cosmos. The Wachowski chapters are bigger, grander, and noisier, while Mr. Tykwer's are tighter, funnier, and more emotionally resonant. The Tale of Frobisher is perhaps the only piece that could stand alone, a perfect novella of artistic rivalry, sexual misbehavior, and poetic despair. Considering it in isolation is difficult, however, and contrary to the film's design. A major difference between the movie and its source is structural. Mr. Mitchell nests his plots inside one another, splitting each one to make room for the others, and making his book into something like a set of Russian dolls or a turducken. Mr. Tykwer and the Wachowskis, abetted by the heroic editing of Alexander Berner, have abandoned this symmetrical literary design, opting for the more cinematically manageable technique of cross-cutting. The narrative strands are woven together, elegantly plaited and quilted at some points, tangled and snarled in others. Connective tissue is supplied by music, composed by Reinhold Heil, Johnny Klimek, and Mr. Tykwer, by voiceovers and visual echoes, and also by the reappearance of the same actors in elaborate but nonetheless transparent disguises. Mr. Weaving, for example, memorably pops up as a devil, a Victorian capitalist, a sadistic female nurse, a corporate totalitarian bureaucrat, and a hitman. Zachary the Goatherd is played by Tom Hanks, sporting facial tattoos and speaking in a futuristic pidgin. In Zachary's language, I means yes, cog means no, and true means very true indeed. Mr. Hanks also plays, among other roles, a scientist who aids the journalist's investigation, a London gangster, and a 19th century quack attending to Adam Ewing, the ailing South Seas traveler. That poor fellow is played by Jim Sturgess. The muckraking journalist, Louisa Ray, is Halle Berry. She also appears as Marinum, who visits Zachary's Island as part of a delegation of technologically advanced researchers, and she is almost unrecognizable as Jocasta Ayres, married to the temperamental maestro played by Jim Broadbent. He is elsewhere a ship's captain and the luckless publisher Timothy Cavendish. You see what I mean about quantity. Simply enumerating the rest of the cast members and saying what they do would turn this review into a Domesday book of postmodern film acting, and identifying the flavors of ham they import to the proceedings would require an advanced degree in charcuterie. There is, in any case, a lot of acting here. It is delivered by the bushel, by the truckload, by the schooner, and the quality varies. Mr. Broadbent is, as ever, delightful, and Ben Whishaw is perfect as the witty and passionate Frobisher. Hugh Grant indulges in some sly, vulgar villainy with impressive prosthetic teeth, and Susan Sarandon floats through a few scenes trailing mists of love and weary wisdom. As Sonmi, the South Korean actress Doona Bai is a haunting, somber presence. Sonmi awakens from a life of grim deprivation, a condition of slavery that is horrible to contemplate and horrifyingly easy to imagine, into an awareness of the possibility of freedom. The tale of how she recovers her humanity and the cost she pays for it becomes scripture in Zachary's time, and her fate is also the allegorical key to the rest of Cloud Atlas. In every chapter, powerful forces work to constrain, exploit, and otherwise suppress the individual and collective desire for liberation. Alliances form between victims and sympathetic members of the race are cast in power, and even when their efforts are doomed, they manage to keep some hope alive for the future. Mr. Tykwer and the Wachowskis emphasize the spiritual rather than the political dimensions of Mr. Mitchell's novel, and at the same time make his meanings less elusive and more accessible. Perhaps too much so. Cloud Atlas aspires to be a perception-altering head trip in the tradition of 2001: A Space Odyssey and The Matrix, but instead of leaving you trembling in contemplation of metaphysical mysteries, it succumbs to the term paperish explication that weighed down V for Vendetta and the second and third Matrix movies. Its reach is admirable, but its grasp is, if anything, too secure. For a movie devoted to the celebration of freedom, Cloud Atlas works awfully hard to control and contain its meanings, to tell you exactly what it is about, rather than allowing you to dream and wonder within its impressively imagined world. The movie insists, repeatedly and didactically, that a thread of creative, sustaining possibility winds its way through all human history, glimmering even in its darkest hours. A beautiful notion and possibly true, but unfortunately not quite true. Based on a perusal of reviews for Cloud Atlas, one might be convinced that the sprawling, ambitious, epic adaptation of David Mitchell's 2004 novel is either a masterpiece or an unmitigated disaster. The reality is somewhere in between. It's hard to argue that Cloud Atlas isn't too long. Discounting the credits, it clocks in at around 160 minutes, and that its rambling structure can result in an emotional disconnect with the material. But there are some amazing sequences, and the film's visual style is powerful. The key to successfully absorbing the movie may be in not trying to overthink what's on screen. Decoding the thin strands that connect stories to each other is a journey better embarked upon by those watching it for a second or third time. As is the case with the book, the movie presents 6 separate stories that transpire across a slice of time beginning in the mid-19th century and ending in a distant post-apocalyptic future. The first tale, The Pacific Journal of Adam Ewing, takes place on a ship making a Pacific Ocean crossing and relates the unlikely friendship that develops between a San Francisco notary, Jim Sturgess, and a Maori slave, David Gyasi. Story number 2, Letters from Zedelgem, transpires in 1931 Belgium and tells of the relationship between a young musician, Ben Whishaw, and the aging composer, Jim Broadbent, for whom he works as an amanuensis. Half-Lives, the first Louisa Ray mystery, occurs in the 1970s and is designed to mimic thrillers of the era. Louisa Ray, Halle Berry, is a young journalist who stumbles upon a plot by an oil company executive, Hugh Grant, to allow a nuclear reactor to melt down. The fourth segment, The Ghastly Ordeal of Timothy Cavendish, is a contemporary tale about a British publisher, Jim Broadbent, who is confined against his will in a bizarre nursing home, where aging parents are consigned to live out their lives when their children want them out of sight, out of mind. An Orison of Sonmi 451 takes Cloud Atlas into the future, the 22nd century, where a genetically engineered fabricant, Doona, is used by revolutionaries to be the figurehead for their rebellion. The sixth and final story, Slush's Crossin' and Everything After, takes place in a time beyond the 22nd century when a primitive tribesman, Tom Hanks, befriends a woman, Halle Berry, who belongs to a technologically advanced culture and makes a bargain with her that changes both their futures. The connective conceits from the novel are present in the movie, but at times difficult to discern. In Cloud Atlas, someone in each story reads or views a dramatization of the chronologically previous one. For example, the fabricant Sonmi 451 watches a movie adaptation of The Ghastly Ordeal of Timothy Cavendish. In other instances, characters read letters or books. A less successful attempt to link the segments is to have reincarnations of characters appear in different time periods. By employing actors for multiple roles, the filmmakers try to highlight this, but it's questionable whether the often horrendous makeup jobs required to accomplish this undermine the intentions. The directors of Cloud Atlas are or were considered visionaries. The Wachowskis, of course, were behind The Matrix and its sequels. German filmmaker Tykwer is best known for Run Lola Run. Their decision to interleave the stories rather than present them in series makes sense because some are more compelling than others. My favorites were the first Louisa Ray mystery and An Orison of Sonmi 451. The former is a nice potboiler, and the latter is thematically interesting and contains an effective emotional component. On the other hand, I was less than enthralled by the inert Letters from Zedelgum and the futuristic Slush's Crossin' and Everything After, which feels like a generic post-apocalyptic tale in which dialogue is often impossible to decipher. Visually, there's no doubting Cloud Atlas's power to arrest. This is one of those movies that deserves to be seen on a big screen, and thankfully there's no 3D involved. The most eye-popping sequences occur during the 22nd century story, where comparisons to Blade Runner, The Fifth Element, and the Star Wars prequels will be made, but the effects work is no less effective, although not as ostentatious during the other episodes. As good as the computer enhancement is, however, the makeup proves unable to add to the illusion. Tom Hanks is the most negatively impacted by this, although he's not the only one. In far too many scenes, Hanks looks like a middle-aged guy buried under layers of latex. The filmmakers have assembled a nice combination of A-list stars, Hanks, Bear, Hugh Grant, serious actors, Broadbent, Sarandon, less familiar faces, Sturgess, Wishaw, and performers largely unknown in North America, South Korean actress Doona. Of all the actors, Hanks gets to have the most fun, playing a profanity-spewing thug out of a Guy Ritchie movie, a sleazy doctor, a self-serving hotel receptionist, a whistleblower, an exaggerated Jim Broadbent, and a futuristic tribesman. Hugo Weaving, who memorably played Agent Smith in The Matrix, appears in all 6 stories in full villain mode. The poor guy doesn't even get one opportunity to play a sympathetic character, instead essaying, among others, a ruthless hitman, a Nurse Ratch type, and a demonic entity. Much has been written about the use of yellow face in Cloud Atlas, the application of makeup to cause Caucasian actors appear Asian. This has been described as racist or worse. Those who take the time to consider, however, will recognize that both Doona and Halle Berry play white characters. The yellow face makeup applied to several actors is done with a non-malicious purpose. It's to allow the same actors to inhabit different characters across the stories. Case in point, Jim Sturgess and Doona. In 2 of the segments, they are in love. The Pacific Journal of Adam Ewing requires them to be white. In An Orison of Sonmi 51, they are Korean. If anything, Cloud Atlas's allowing actors to cross racial lines can be seen as an emphasis of the universality of the human experience rather than a repudiation of it. Looking for deep meaning or a sense of cosmic convergence in Cloud Atlas may take the viewer down the path to dissatisfaction and frustration. Admittedly, because of its length, its occasional pretentious dialogue, and a tone that hints at intended greatness, there's a tendency to expect more from the movie than what it delivers. Some viewers will no doubt believe they have experienced something more transcendent than what's actually on screen. And who am I to dispute them? However, taken as little more than 6 disconnected shorts featuring the same group of players in different roles, Cloud Atlas works. It's entertaining, and the manner in which it has been edited reduces one's tendency to lose patience with the less engaging stories. It's not an Oscar contender and probably won't break any box office records, but as one of the most expensive indie productions ever assembled, it has accomplished many things, not the least of which is translating an unfilmable novel into a motion picture that is both coherent and able to retain the soul of its source material. The movie was inspired by the much-loved novel of the same name by David Mitchell. That in the novel, the stories were told in chronological order and then circled back again from end to beginning. That the movie finds its connections through the reappearances of the same actors in different roles and deliberately refers to one story from within another. Now are you wiser? I'm treading water, and now could follow a very long paragraph introducing and describing the different characters played by the actors, but you would lose your way all the same because many of the performances and disguises are so cunningly effective. I could tell you that Hal Berry's work as a mid-one 1970s investigative reporter works well for me, and the gnarly wisdom of Tom Hanks as an old man telling tales is the most impenetrable I despair. I think you will want to see this daring and visionary film directed by Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, and Andy Wachowski. Anywhere you go where movie people gather, it'll be discussed. Deep theories will be proposed. Someone will say, I don't know what in the hell I saw the names of Freud and Jung will come up. And now you expect me to unwrap the mystery from the enigma and present you with a nice shiny riddle. Sometimes the key to one movie can be suggested by another one. We know that the title refers to early drawings of the shapes and behavior of clouds. Not long ago, I saw a Swedish film, Simon and the Oaks, about a daydreaming boy who formed a bond with an oak tree in its limbs. He would lie reading books of imagination and then allow his eyes to rest on the clouds overhead as he read a book about desert wanderers. The clouds seemed to take shape as a ghostly caravan of camels in procession across the sky. I was never ever bored by Cloud Atlas on my second viewing. I gave up any attempt to work out the logical connections between the segments, stories, and characters. What was important was that I set my mind free to play clouds don't really look like camels or sailing ships or castles in the sky. They are simply a natural process at work. So too perhaps our lives, because we have minds and clouds, do not we desire freedom? That is the shape the characters in Cloud Atlas take and how they attempt to direct our thoughts. Any concrete factual attempt to nail the film down to cold fact to tell you what it means is as pointless as trying to build a Clockwork Orange. But, oh, what a film this is, and what a demonstration of the magical, dreamlike qualities of the cinema, and what an opportunity for the actors, and what a leap by the directors who free themselves from the chains of narrative, continuity, and then the wisdom of the old man staring into the flames makes perfect sense. Deaf I may steal from Tolstoy. Competently made movies are all alike. Ambitiously messy movies are all ambitiously messy in their own way, which is as much to say Cloud Atlas is basically a disaster, but it's a disaster. Minute running time, and a disaster that could never have happened if talented people with bold ideas hadn't been willing to spend a ludicrous amount of other people's money to realize their visions at the cost of anything else. It is a disaster that I loved, like I have loved few other movies in 2012, and if personal edification were the only component in selecting a star rating, would give this a perfect 5. That would be poor reviewing, though. And the fact of the matter is that I can't imagine who I'd recommend Cloud Atlas to. Any more than I can imagine who I'd recommend should definitely avoid it. That's the problem with absurdly singular movies. They aren't comparable to anything else. A collaboration between the seemingly unlikely talents of Tom, Tykwer of Run Lola Run, and Perfume, the story of a murderer, and the Wachowski. Siblings of the Matrix and Speed Racer, the film is adapted from an unadaptable 2004 novel by David Mitchell. Tykwer has been to the unadaptable well before, but Cloud Atlas does a better job of it than Perfume, which tells 6 stories in a nested ABC-DC Bay structure that could be recreated in a cinematic form, but would undoubtedly not be very exciting if it was. And so instead, the movie Cloud Atlas opts for the simpler shape of intercutting between those stories in grand old D.W. Griffith fashion. The other notable trait of the book that each of the 6 stories is written in a completely different voice and style, is translated rather more directly, so that each of the 6 narrative threads in the movie is represented as a different genre. And that's how we end up with a seagoing adventure about a mad doctor and a young businessman set in the South Pacific in 1849, a gay love drama. In Belgium in 1932, a political thriller about a crusading journalist in 1973, Southern California, a quirky old Britishers comedy in 2012, a future shock action movie in Neo-Soul in 2144, and a post-apocalypse adventure set in what appears to be possibly the ruins of New Zealand 106 years after the fall. Tykwer, having directed the more realistic 1932, 1973, and 2012 segments, with the Wachowski taking over the more nutsoid period SL Sci-Fi episodes in all 6 of these stories. Characters are played by a cluster of actors who appear in wildly different forms. Tom Hanks is a scientist, here a tribal leader, there a hotel manager in another place. Jim Broadbent is a venal composer and adult writer. A ship captain. Other actors in for the fun include Hal Berry, Ben Weiss, Saw B. Doona, Jim Sturgess, Keith David, Susan Sarandon, Hugh Grant, and Hugo Weaving, the last of whom comes the closest to playing the same character in all 6 episodes, in that he is fairly consistently a bad guy. Men play women, women play men, white people play ethnic mutts in a future Korea, Koreans play whites in a past San Francisco middle-aged people play old people in makeup. So unbelievable. That makes me sorry for all the mean things I said about Armie Hammer and J. Edgar, all of which actually serves to make the movie stronger in at least this regard than the book, for the book could merely posit that these characters are interrelated across time, while the movie can dramatically demonstrate how personalities reoccur throughout history, and thus strengthen very much its them of something kind of like reincarnation, but not exactly that, in which patterns happen over and over again, and people are linked by their place in that pattern, retelling the same kind of emotional journeys in seemingly irreconcilable locations and cultures. Sure, it's one part New Agey hokum and one part sentimental. Overkill, the film's overriding message, never exactly obscure, but pounded into the viewer's face like a wrecking ball in the final 20 minutes or so, is that love transcends all things, time and space and death. But Tykwer and the Wachowski are fiercely committed to fleshing it out anyway, and far better to have Hoke key sentiment treated with enthusiasm and passion than to have anything that only approaches its theme with subdued conviction. The one thing that can never be said against Cloud Atlas is that it lacks conviction, even the things about it that are the worst, such as the clumsy attempt at writing dialogue in post-fall vernacular, inherited from the book where it worked better. The parts of the makeup that are awful, Grant, as an old man, Bah, as a Caucasian, or the weaker performances, Hanks and Barry, both of them owing in no small part to those actors being stuck with some of the loopier parts to play, are all victims of proud ambition, not of weak half measures, and the parts that work are so much better than the parts that don't work. The strange metacriticism of the 2012 sequence, which mocks its genre, even while indulging in its worst, Tendencies, the rich, wholly unmodulated emotions of 1932, the best segment, in my estimation, the over-the-top CGI in Neo Soul, my least favorite, but with the most imaginative and engaging visuals that manages to look unreal in a way far more artistic and deliberate than most blockbuster films that only want to use visual effects in a lonely, photorealistic manner. The score by Taran Oldheil and Johnny Kimmy, which serves a key narrative function. The title comes from the Cloud Atlas seat composed in 1932. And if it is not as life-altering as the script wants it to be, it's still one of the few truly beautiful scores to come out of a year that has been so far a low watermark for film music. The cutting together of moments from across the 6 stories, sometimes tied together by visual elements, sometimes by emotional beats, sometimes by narrative links, sometimes just in ages and ages. And the sheer puzzle box fun of keeping track of who's playing who and what lines and concepts get repeated, a game that does not, as far as I can tell, deepen the meaning of the film at all, but is much more fun to play. Here than in each of puff-faced Chris Nolan picture movies, this idiosyncratic don't get made all that often. Movies this idiosyncratic on a budget, this inflated don't get made but once every handful of years. And on that front alone, Cloud Atlas is essential. Cinema, genuinely visionary to use a word that gets crapped out too often, with too little understanding of what that word means, and wildly varied in the nature and style of those visions without ever feeling like a patchwork made up of disparate and incompatible elements. So visionary, in fact, that it's made me want to reappraise Speed Racer, which does similar things. Aesthetically, in fact, one of the most impressive things about the film is how well it all fits together. Despite 2 distinct authorial voices working in multiple genres, it is, I think, a hard film to like, but an awfully easy film to love, and almost as easy to deeply hate. Better by far that than just another chunk of respectably forgettable Oscar bait of that. I have no doubt other information about this film. It's epic ambitious and one of the most impressively entertaining films of the year. It is also bound to divide critics and audiences alike, as it has already been lauded by some to be among the best films of the year, while simultaneously being panned by others as one of the biggest flops of all time. I am here to tell you that I categorize Cloud Atlas on the side of brilliance. I can also tell you that I sympathize and understand most of the criticism that this film will face, though I vehemently stand by Cloud Atlas as one of my favorite films of 2012. Cloud Atlas is definitely not a movie to walk away from. You will want to enter it with a sharp mind and an empty bladder, based on the book of the same name by David Mitchell. Cloud Atlas follows 6 different storylines interwoven and spanning hundreds of years. The earliest follows a shipwrecked notary in the 1850s. Another storyline takes place over 300 years into the future, and the other 4 stories take place anywhere in between, as confusing as it may. Already, SoundCloud Atlas is never dull, and is a thoroughly entertaining, massive undertaking. I cannot stress enough that this is not a classic critic film, where I am claiming to get it more than anyone else as I ride my high horse and raise my nose as some sort of elitist film snob. You don't have to get Cloud out Atlas to enjoy it, to love it. In fact, I would never claim that I fully understand the whole of it, nor would I fully believe anyone who would claim the same. But instead of being abstract and unreachable, I'm thinking of critically acclaimed films of the past few years like Tree of Life or Melancholia. Cloud Atlas works on so many levels and overreaches so many conventions and expectations that I really feel most critics with negative feelings toward the film were simply taken off guard, unprepared, and perhaps a bit rattled that not every dot could be easily connected. Perhaps I'm wrong. As a critic, maybe I am supposed to point out each flaw and discrepancy, but as a lover of film, I simply am in awe, even if this film doesn't permeate your soul. Most should be able to at least recognize and applaud the filmmaker's aspirations. Many identifiable themes stretch throughout the courses of time as presented in Cloud Atlas. The Believes in call it reincarnation or the CC of life, death, and birth. The fine acting ensemble plays All of the characters in each of the different timelines, sometimes easily recognizable and sometimes completely masked in makeup and wardrobe. Take, for instance, Tom Hanks, who in the future timeline plays a fearful man trying to survive an onslaught by a cannibalistic bad guy. In a past timeline, he plays a shady doctor who tries to poison a patient so he can claim his gold. These actors are not so much plain characters, but are rather representing souls as they drift throughout time. Imagine that souls simply exist, and when you die, your soul continues on as the flow of time pushes us all forward. Cloud Atlas shows a connectivity in each timeline linking these souls together, easy to follow because we're seeing the same actors pop up in each story. It tells us that yes, pure evil does exist. Every incarnation for Hugo Weaving shows his monstrous disposition and that there is a natural order to life. Also, that good people can make bad choices. It believes in soulmates. Fascinating that in some lifetimes you connect with your soulmate, and others you may not. Much is dictated by personal decisions made in their past and present lives. Although the film brings forth incredibly deep and cerebral thoughts towards our humanity and our fate, it also believes heavily in the idea of choice in each instance. Characters are faced with choices that have profound effects not only on their current beings, but on future life incarnations. If all of this heavy talk about past lives is too much to handle, the best part about Cloud Atlas is that it works on the uppermost level as compelling entertainment. It's a mystery and an adventure, a romance, and a thriller. How this film is not a colossal mess or an unwatchable jumble is an achievement in and of itself. It actually ends up being the opposite, as there is never a dull moment. This is a film that may require multiple viewings to pick up on all of the details, but it is also a film that is easy enough to follow if you choose not to overanalyze it. There was a joy in trying to recognize the different actors in each timeline, and if you stay for the credits, you will be pleasantly shocked to see all of their roles identified, that these actors turned up as characters you may not have even noticed the first time around. Has there ever been a more ambitious attempt at such a complex story in the history of the movies? It took 3 directors to pull off the 6 genres represented in this film. Their work and efforts deserve to be commended. I didn't mind some of the shoddy makeup jobs on some of the characters, especially an attempt at making Hugo Weaving look Asian, because the rest of the film is sleek and beautifully crafted. Plus, for every makeup job that brings forth a laugh, there are 5 that are award-worthy in the film. A composer, played by Jim Broadbent, creates what he calls the Cloud Atlas seat. It is a piece of music that contains 6 overlapping solo performances when laid over the top of each other. The 6 pieces come together to create a beautiful symphonic. Sound directors Andy Wachowski, Lana Wachowski, and Tom Tykwer expect a lot from the Bay audience of Cloud Atlas, a motion picture set on the boundaries of time, genre, and conventional filmmaking at once. The viewer must be able to process 6 separate stories that span 5 periods. In time, as the filmmakers dance backward and forward, among them the ambitious structure reformatting David Mitchell's 2004 novel. Each story follows a distinct genre, among them drama, comedy, tragedy, thriller, science fiction, and adventure. An audience must identify how the impressive ensemble of actors has separate roles in each story, emphasizing the epic configuration as one of interconnectivity, while the themes throughout the various stories mirror and often take cues from one another. Decoding exactly how these compilated and interwoven elements form a whole is less important than the feeling of something larger behind it all. By the end of this 72-minute wonder, the viewer need only recognize the implementation power and tradition of great storytelling, funded independently by mostly German money and distributed in the U.S. by Warner Brothers Cloud Atlas. Must be one of the most aspiring and expensive independent films ever produced, securing a budget of over $100 million. ERS German filmmaker Tykwer Run Lola Run teamed with the Wachowski Speed Racer, for a picture they all must have known would not appeal to the masses, no matter how successful the Wachowski siblings' actionized pseudo-intellectual Matrix trilogy may have been. Certainly no Hollywood studio would put forth the backing necessary to erect a seemingly impenetrable, unfilmable novel into a heady, near 3-hour film, whose result would be inevitable polarization of the mass. Yes, and yet nothing about this production feels inaccessible or reminiscent of a picture with any limitations whatsoever, from the pristine quality of the special effects to the sheer scope of the sets. This is a film without margins. Every facet looks like that of a major Hollywood production, except it's infused with the poetic and philosophical insights of filmmakers working outside of a major studio. The director's best visual resource, however, remains the cast assembled here are Tom Hanks, Halle, Hugh Grant, Jim Broadbent, Jim Sturgess, Keith David Benoit, Doona, Hugo Weaving, James Darcy, Susan Sarandon, and Joe Sun each plays multiple roles, most with a major part in at least one story, and most occupying races and genders not their own during one of their supporting roles. To describe them all would be far-reaching and time-consuming. But consider this example. Barry plays an investigative reporter, a Jewish woman, a slave, a male South Korean doctor, an Indian woman, and a member of a technologically enhanced future race. Each role for each actor comes with an individual makeup design, transforming these performers and their protagonists in ways that make the viewer's experience an investigative one. Some of the costumes are less successful than others, such as when Doona becomes an awkward British lass, but the narrative symbolism behind these choices speaks volumes. Though narrow viewers may find dressing up one race as another to be in poor taste, racial representations are indiscriminate and bound by a greater purpose, the effect emphasizing the film's stable theme of eternal recurrence, the notion that within infinite time and space, existence will cycle and recur an infinite number of times. The stories themselves range from the mid-19th century to a distant, post-apocalyptic future world. Chronologically, the film begins with the Pacific Journal of Adam Ying in 1850, following a naive notary Sturgess who, while at sea, defends the life of a Moriori tribe stowaway and finds himself poisoned by a duplicitous friend. Next comes Letters from Zillam, a 1931 account of a struggling musician Wishaw who writes letters to his illicit male lover and becomes an apprentice to an idolized composer. Half-Lives, the first Louisa Ray mystery, takes place in the 1970s and proceeds like the China Syndrome, where a reporter Barry uncovers a sinister plot involving a nuclear power executive. Ghastly Ordeal of Timothy Cavendish, where an aged publisher Broadbent is entered inside an appalling senior care facility from where he plots to escape in the mid-22nd century. And Orison of Sonum 451 tells of a genetically engineered servant bee in a dystopian neo-soul. After being rescued from certain death by rebel forces, she becomes a figurehead for an uprising against the powers that be in the final mythic story called Slush's Crossin'. And Everth and After, set in the distant post-apocalyptic future, a primitive tribesman, Hanks, guides a woman from an elite race Barry to a place on his island where the remains of a long-lost culture still stand, along with a vast array of characters, their similarities and reincarnated souls. They're amazing sights to behold in Cloud Atlas. Most apparent are the futurist sequences with elaborate sci-fi chases on energized highways along a vast neon-laden cityscape. Or there's the crumbled post-apocalyptic world where Hank's character is plagued by a devilish green-skinned whisperer weaving spouting lies and suspicions in his ear. These most audacious examples, directed by the Wachowski, might threaten to overshadow the subtleties of Tyr's contributions in the past and present segments, where his immersion into historical details is flawless, and his characters have far more dramatically complicated circumstances. The most affecting tale involves the relationship between the struggling musician and his devoted lover, while the most heartwarming concerns the comical senior citizens revolting against a crooked nurse. ratchet figure, weaving as a whole. There's something for everyone here. But for those not pulled toward this or that genre, the entire picture remains enthralling to explore the individual. Stories and their precise connections to one another in more detail would be futile for the purpose of this review. Let us instead consider the structure and themes within each tale. There are varied methods and devices of storytelling: novels, personal letters, journals, motion pictures, pictorials, and the oral tradition. Mitchell's book unfolded sequential, telling the first half of each story from the participant's perspective, and the second within a separate story from the perspective of someone else reading about or watching it in video form. But the trio of directors uses a bravado structure that aligns the narrative beats of every story cross-cutting through time to further highlight how every story is different. Yet every story is the same. Emotional aches and suspenseful turns seem to occur across time, but in harmony with one another. Inside the film's composition as such, there are recurring themes throughout: class struggles, elitist, monsters, betrayal, slavery, humanist revolution, and most transcendently, love. Each ripples across time and each resonates in separate ways. Some are joyful, others harrowing, others still hilarious or exciting. Our involvement is never limited to a single emotional reaction, but the capacity to feel the breadth of emotions from one moment to the next is essential. Cloud Atlas opens with one of the many characters played by Tom Hanks recounting tales around a fire. From his aged, wrinkled face comes a grizzled voice, and a horrible scar down his face cuts across his one pale eye. He might be an ancient caveman grunting out his tale, but in fact he belongs to the distant future. Time is relative, but all remains the same. What a simple, rather beautiful notion behind such an uncommonly grand piece of film, whose ideas will either speak volumes or completely dismiss whole sections of the audience. Undeniable is the profound vision of Tykwer and the Wachowski who approach Terrence Malick, The Tree of Life. Territory, in that their divisive film is less an intellectual viewing than something that must be felt and experienced perhaps multiple times to truly grasp its meaning, or at least what it means to you amid the spell of visual and narrative connections. Beyond question, Cloud Atlas will confound and maybe even aggravate some unwilling to quite simply go with the flow, but others will find what few have: a bold, technically awesome, and thematically enduring picture whose arrangement and ambition are unprecedented. More detail of all the films to play at this year's edition of the Toronto International Film Festival. Certainly none is as ambitious as Cloud Atlas, and now unconventional omnibus of a film, not only featuring the work of multiple directors, it's a collab separation between the Wachowskis and Tom Tykwer, but featuring a core group of actors playing not only multiple characters, but multiple races, and even in one case, multiple sexes. I suppose the message here is that under the skin, we're all the same. Whether we're hero-villain or in between, a grand statement, you have to admire Cloud Atlas based on David Deitch. Mitchell's novel, although to say it'll be divisive is an understatement. At the press screening I attended, it was obvious that half the audience thought they were watching some kind of masterpiece, while the other half couldn't wait for the credits to roll. I totally disagree with the latter, as whatever it is, Cloud Atlas is certainly never boring, but I can't quite proclaim it as masterpiece as anything. So Layered demands multiple viewings to truly decipher, but I did think Cloud Atlas was damn good, although I had issues with it, given that it tells half a dozen stories and feels like not only 6 movies in the one, but 6 movies going on at the same time. Cloud Atlas is remarkably easy to follow of the stories. There were some I liked more than others, with the Wachowski and Ta were tackling multiple genres. From comedy to action to sci-fi to drama, everything is covered here of all the actors to me. Tom Hanks is the one who deserves the most praise, as the guy goes full on in each of his roles. Granted, his acting in Cloud Atlas is distinctly not naturalistic and big, but in a film which is virtually all broadstones, It has to be. Hanks gets to play everything from a sadistic doctor on a slave ship to a Cockney gangster, a humble scientist, and most significantly, a tribesman who has to overcome his own fear to protect his family and the woman he loves. It's this tribal story where Hanks and Highbury speak in a type of post-English, English which may be ridiculed with the truth, instead being the true and so on. But really, you just have to go with it. I certainly did, and I'm not the least cynical guy, so I suppose that boat as well, like Hanks Highbury, is probably the second most featured player, with her co-starring part in the tribal section and her lead role as a mid-70s investigative journalist being the most prominent of them all, though Jim Sturgess probably has the most challenging part. In addition to playing a slave trader and tribesman, he also has to play a futuristic Korean warrior and handle the huge futuristic action set pieces. While I really hated his Korean makeup, it looked goofy. He does very well in each role. Hugo Weaving probably has the most fun with him showing up in each story as a force of evil, ranging from a hitman and evil female nurse, and possibly even the devil himself. Jim Broadbent provides most of the laughs with his primary section of the film, where he's a doddering old publisher committed to an old folks' home by his unscrupulous brother Hugh Grant in one of his half-dozen small parts. So whatever you think of Cloud Atlas, one can't argue that it truly does have something for everyone. Whether you like futuristic action, brutal warfare, zany comedy, SLS, slapstick, romance, drama, or any other conceivable genre. While it's probably a little overwhelming upon its first viewing, I hope to re-review this once I get to see it a second time. My first impression of Cloud Atlas is a strongly positive one, even if I can't call it an all-out masterpiece. But it may evolve into one without the Wachowski or Tear having to change a frame, or it could be a disaster. Only time will tell. That I end celebration of Roger Ebert, we are reprinting the favorite reviews and articles of our writers and other distinguished readers. My favorite review from Roger is of Cloud Atlas. Of course, I love Cloud Atlas, so it should surprise no one that I chose this sweeping epic. I also believe this review by Riar is as exceptional as the film. I think some critics make the mistake of believing they must have an answer or should be ready to explain a film, but I find Roger's ability to appreciate Cloud Atlas through what he doesn't know, and how doesn't know it, as not only a great formal exercise, but a refreshing edge of humility and intellectual vulnerability that more critics should lean on, while film is a machine for empathy. Said empathy only comes from both not only an emotional vulnerability, but an intellectual one too. This review is quintessentially both Robert Daniels. Even as I was watching Cloud Atlas the first time, I knew I would need to see it again. Now that I've seen it the second time, I know I'd like to see it a third time, but I no longer believe repeated viewings will solve anything. To borrow Churchill's description of Russia, it is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. It fascinates in the moment. It's getting from one moment to the next. That is tricky. Surely this is one of the most ambitious films ever made. The little world of film criticism has been alive with interpretations of it which propose to explain something that lies outside explanation. Any explanation of a work of art must be found in it, not taken to it as a film teacher. I was always being told by students that a film by David Lynch, say, or Werner Herzog was a retelling of the life of Christ, say, or Moby Dick. My standard reply was, maybe it's simply the telling of itself, yet Cloud Atlas cries out for an explanation. And surely you've noticed that I've been tap dancing around one. I could tell you that it relates 6 stories taking place between the years 1849 and 2346. I could tell you that the same actors appear in different roles, playing characters of different races, genders, and ages. Some are not even human, but fabricants. I could tell you that the acting and makeup are so effective that often I had no idea if I was looking at Tom Hanks, Halbury, or Jim Broadbent. Could tell you that. And what help is it? I could tell you that each segment is a refashioning of the story contained in the previous one, that the same birthmark turns up in every period of time, that a repeated motif is that all lives are connected by a thirst for freedom, that the movie was inspired by the much-loved novel of the same name by David Mitchell, that in the novel the stories were told in chronological order and then circled back again from end to beginning, that the movie finds its connections through the reappearances of the same actors in different roles and deliberately refers to one story from within another. Now are you wiser, I'm treading water, and now could follow a very long paragraph, introducing and describing the different characters played by the actors, but you would lose your way all the same, because many of the performances and disguises are so cunningly effective. I could tell you that Hal Berry's work as a mid-1 1970s investigative reporter works well for me, and the gnarly wisdom of Tom. Hanks as an old man telling tales is the most impenetrable. I despair. I think you will want to see this daring and visionary film directed by Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, and Andy Wachowski anywhere you go. Where movie people gather, it'll be discussed, deep theories will be proposed. Someone will say, I don't know what in the hell, I saw the names of Freud and Jung will come up, and now you expect me to unwrap the mystery from the enigma and present you with a nice shiny riddle. Sometimes the key to one movie can be suggested by another one. We know that the title refers to early drawings of the shapes and behavior of clouds. Not long ago I saw a Swedish film, Simon and Duke, The Oaks, about a daydreaming boy who formed a bond with an oak tree in its limbs. He would lie reading books of imagination, and then allow his eyes to rest on the clouds overhead as he read a book about desert wanderers. The clouds seemed to take shape as a ghostly caravan of camels in procession across the sky. I was never ever bored by Cloud. Atlas, on my second viewing, I gave up any attempt to work out the logical connections between the segment stories and characters. What was important was that I set my mind free to play clouds. Do not really look like camels or sailing ships or castles in the sky. They are simply a natural process at work. So too perhaps are our lives, because we have minds and clouds do not. We desire freedom. That is the shape the characters in Cloud Atlas take, and how they attempt to direct our thoughts. Any concrete, factual attempt to nail the film down to cold fact, to tell you what it means, is as pointless as trying to build a Clockwork Orange. But oh, what a film this is, and what a demonstration of the magical, dreamlike qualities of the cinema, and what an opportunity for the actors, and what a leap by the directors, who free themselves from the chains of narrative continuity, and then the wisdom of the old man staring into the flames. Makes perfect sense. Extra information: 6 individuals belonging to different generations go on an emotional ride while exploring how human actions impact the lives of their loved ones in this ever-changing world, based on a titular book that was deemed unfilmable. This is a story unlike any other, and an experiment that needs to be admired for how ambitious it is. What we have here are 6 stories that happen in various different eras in history. Each era is solidly represented in terms of screen time and momentum, but of course some are more interesting than others. 1849 is generally not particularly engaging, though the last scene is absolutely amazing, but more on that later. 1936 features a very touching gay romance and is one of the more heartwarming and heartbreaking storylines in the movie. 1973 and 2012 are undoubtedly my least favorite parts. Both feature some memorable characters, but not much in terms of substance and or memorable themes and plot points. 2144 is the most SF of the bunch, and it is stellar. Neo Soul looked so cool and suitably futuristic, while the Blade Runner visuals and themes were excellent and so well explored. 2321 took its time to get there, but eventually it became fascinating as this connective thread for the entire film. The main issue here is the editing I did. Like the choice to chronologically feature the segments at first, but afterward they get scattered That was an inspired choice that worked well as the visuals and thematic touches were well connected between the segments. However, sometimes the length of the segments felt disconnected as some were abruptly ended, while others went on for way too long. It's a messy F film and uneven in terms of the segment's quality. However, how could anybody do this type of film and not make it be messy? This is why I find Cloud Atlas to be hugely underrated and very wrongly judged by way too many unappreciative critics. This is the type of inspired, ambitious project that needs to be admired despite its flaws, and I do believe it is going to benefit from repeated viewings. The heart of the film lies in that final scene in 1849, where we get to realize the main message of the entire movie by comparing a water drop to a vast ocean. We realize that the world has always been and will continue to be full of crime, evil, and injustice, but just a single act of kindness will always have the power to ripple through time and lead to necessary changes. It was thus inspired how the film connected injustice's future to past, as a result making a claim that throughout human history, injustices died out, but new ones were then born. The use of same actors for every role in all Stowe storylines was admirable, but ultimately problematic, as Tom Hanks and Halle Berry in particular struggled in certain roles, though both flourished when they were well cast. Doona is one of the standouts as she's magnificent throughout, and Jim Broadbent is fantastic as always. Cloud Atlas also features an absolutely phenomenal, truly moving and grandiose score, as well as great sets, costumes, and attention to detail. It looks and sounds terrific, with the cinematography and VFX also being superb. What is an ocean but a multitude of drops? The most meaningful quote of Cloud Atlas emphasizes how the world has been and always will be riddled with evil and injustice, and how important a single act of kindness that can impact and change the future is, though obviously messy in terms of editing and acting. Cloud Atlas is still a highly misunderstood gem that needs to be admired for its impressive multiple era structure that was mostly very well interconnected. The film is an OD, a visual treat, but above all else, a very inspired moving experiment that can only benefit from repeat viewings. This film, directed by Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, Lilly Wachowski, written by Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, Lilly Wachowski, produced by Grant Hill, Stefan, Arndt, Lana Wachowski, Tom Tykwer, Lilly Wachowski, starring Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, Hugo Weaving, Jim Sturgess, D. Ben Whishaw, James Darcy P., Keith David, Susan Sarandon, Hugh Grant, cinematography, JLE. Frank G., edited by Alexander Berner, music by Tom Tykwer, Johnny Kimmy Ryle, production companies, Cloud Atlas Productions, Filme Creative Pool, NR Co-Productions. Distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures in select territories. Focus features. International release states September 8th, 2012 in TIFF. October 26, 2012 in United States. November 15th, 2012 in Germany. Running time 172 minutes. Countries: Germany, United Kingdom, United States. Language English. Budget 100 to 100. 46.7 million box office, $13.5 million. So guys, this is the review of Cloud Atlas movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.